This house wasn't just a structure of brick and mortar to me. It was the living, breathing scrapbook of my life. My husband, Thomas, and I bought it the year after we were married, a bold, foolish, wonderful act of optimism. It was far too big for two young people, a fixer-upper with peeling paint and a garden that was a jungle of weeds. But we saw the potential. We saw the future in its high ceilings and the sunlight that streamed through the bay window in the living room. Thomas, with his engineer's hands that were surprisingly gentle, taught me how to sand floors and patch drywall. I learned the names of every flower we planted in that once wild garden. Peonies for prosperity, lavender for devotion, roses for the enduring, thorny beauty of love itself. We poured our sweat and our dreams into every square inch. This is where we brought Sarah home from the hospital. I remember the overwhelming, terrifying love I felt, carrying her over the threshold, her tiny fist clutching my finger. Her entire childhood is etched into these walls. The pencil marks on the doorframe in the kitchen, charting her growth from a wobbly toddler to a graceful young woman. The faint, stubborn stain of purple paint on the floorboards of her bedroom from an art project gone wonderfully wrong. The window seat in the hall, where she would curl up with a book, rain tapping against the glass. Thomas's sudden passing 10 years ago, from a heart attack, left a silence in this house that I never thought would be filled. The grief was a physical weight, a heavy coat I wore every day. But this house, our shared dream, became my anchor. Tending to the garden he loved, sitting in his favorite armchair, these acts were a form of communion, a way of keeping him close. Sarah was my other anchor. In those first brutal years of widowhood, she was my rock. She'd come over every weekend and we'd drink tea and talk for hours. She was a successful marketing executive, fiercely independent, and I was so immensely proud of the woman she had become. We were a team, or so I had believed. I had always been fiercely independent myself, perhaps to a fault. I never wanted to be a burden. After Thomas died, I managed everything. The finances, the house maintenance, the investments he had wisely set up. I prided myself on my self-sufficiency. I drove myself to appointments, did my own grocery shopping, and my book club and charity work kept my social calendar full. I wasn't just waiting around to die, I was living my life. A life that happened to be housed within these beloved walls. Financially, Thomas had left us very secure. The house was long paid off, and there were substantial savings and investments. My will was simple, a mirror of the life we had built together. Everything, of course, was to go to Sarah. She was my sole heir, the custodian of our family's legacy. It never occurred to me to have it any other way. She was my daughter, my flesh and blood. The thought that she might see me or this house as a mere stepping stone to her own financial freedom was a concept so alien it would have been laughable had the idea even crossed my mind. In recent months, I had noticed a subtle shift. Sarah's visits, once leisurely and filled with laughter, became more efficient. She'd arrived with a list. "Mom, have you thought about a single-level condo? All those stairs can't be good for you." Or, "This garden is so much work, isn't it? We could look at something more low maintenance." I had brushed it off as concern, a daughter worrying about her aging mother. I'd laugh and say, "Nonsense, these stairs keep my legs strong." And, "This garden is my therapy, Sarah. I'd be lost without it." I'd see the slight tightening of her lips, a flicker of impatience in her eyes that I chose to ignore. Love, I believed, meant giving people the benefit of the doubt. It meant seeing the best in them, especially in your own child. Her husband, Mark, was often the catalyst. A nice enough man, ambitious, with a head for numbers, that saw the world in columns of profit and loss. He'd walk through the house, and I could see him mentally appraising the original crown molding, the hardwood floors, the prime value of the land. He'd talk about unlocking equity and downsizing for my comfort. It always felt cold, but I assumed his intentions, however clumsily expressed, were good. He loved Sarah, and he wanted what was best for her. I just never realized that what was best for her in their eyes was predicated on the dismantling of my life. The setup for the betrayal was all there, playing out in slow motion in my sun-drenched kitchen, in my overgrown, beloved garden. I just didn't have the eyes to see it. I was still looking at my little girl. I wasn't seeing the woman she had become. This house wasn't just a structure of brick and mortar to me. It was the living, breathing scrapbook of my life. My husband, Thomas, and I bought it the year after we were married, a bold, foolish, wonderful act of optimism. It was far too big for two young people, a fixer-upper with peeling paint and a garden that was a jungle of weeds. But we saw the potential. We saw the future in its high ceilings and the sunlight that streamed through the bay window in the living room. Thomas, with his engineer's hands that were surprisingly gentle, taught me how to sand floors and patch drywall. I learned the names of every flower we planted in that once wild garden. Peonies for prosperity, lavender for devotion, roses for the enduring, thorny beauty of love itself. We poured our sweat and our dreams into every square inch. This is where we brought Sarah home from the hospital. I remember the overwhelming, terrifying love I felt, carrying her over the threshold, her tiny fist clutching my finger. Her entire childhood is etched into these walls. The pencil marks on the doorframe in the kitchen, charting her growth from a wobbly toddler to a graceful young woman. The faint, stubborn stain of purple paint on the floorboards of her bedroom from an art project gone wonderfully wrong. The window seat in the hall, where she would curl up with a book, rain tapping against the glass. Thomas's sudden passing 10 years ago, from a heart attack, left a silence in this house that I never thought would be filled. The grief was a physical weight, a heavy coat I wore every day. But this house, our shared dream, became my anchor. Tending to the garden he loved, sitting in his favorite armchair, these acts were a form of communion, a way of keeping him close. Sarah was my other anchor. In those first brutal years of widowhood, she was my rock. She'd come over every weekend and we'd drink tea and talk for hours. She was a successful marketing executive, fiercely independent, and I was so immensely proud of the woman she had become. We were a team, or so I had believed. I had always been fiercely independent myself, perhaps to a fault. I never wanted to be a burden. After Thomas died, I managed everything. The finances, the house maintenance, the investments he had wisely set up. I prided myself on my self-sufficiency. I drove myself to appointments, did my own grocery shopping, and my book club and charity work kept my social calendar full. I wasn't just waiting around to die, I was living my life. A life that happened to be housed within these beloved walls. Financially, Thomas had left us very secure. The house was long paid off, and there were substantial savings and investments. My will was simple, a mirror of the life we had built together. Everything, of course, was to go to Sarah. She was my sole heir, the custodian of our family's legacy. It never occurred to me to have it any other way. She was my daughter, my flesh and blood. The thought that she might see me or this house as a mere stepping stone to her own financial freedom was a concept so alien it would have been laughable had the idea even crossed my mind. In recent months, I had noticed a subtle shift. Sarah's visits, once leisurely and filled with laughter, became more efficient. She'd arrived with a list. "Mom, have you thought about a single-level condo? All those stairs can't be good for you." Or, "This garden is so much work, isn't it? We could look at something more low maintenance." I had brushed it off as concern, a daughter worrying about her aging mother. I'd laugh and say, "Nonsense, these stairs keep my legs strong." And, "This garden is my therapy, Sarah. I'd be lost without it." I'd see the slight tightening of her lips, a flicker of impatience in her eyes that I chose to ignore. Love, I believed, meant giving people the benefit of the doubt. It meant seeing the best in them, especially in your own child. Her husband, Mark, was often the catalyst. A nice enough man, ambitious, with a head for numbers, that saw the world in columns of profit and loss. He'd walk through the house, and I could see him mentally appraising the original crown molding, the hardwood floors, the prime value of the land. He'd talk about unlocking equity and downsizing for my comfort. It always felt cold, but I assumed his intentions, however clumsily expressed, were good. He loved Sarah, and he wanted what was best for her. I just never realized that what was best for her in their eyes was predicated on the dismantling of my life. The setup for the betrayal was all there, playing out in slow motion in my sun-drenched kitchen, in my overgrown, beloved garden. I just didn't have the eyes to see it. I was still looking at my little girl. I wasn't seeing the woman she had become. The evening it happened had started out so normally, so deceptively pleasant. Sarah and Mark had come over for dinner, a weekly tradition I cherished. I had spent the afternoon cooking her favorite meal, roast chicken with rosemary and lemon, the way my own mother used to make it, with scalloped potatoes and fresh green beans from the farmer's market. The house was filled with the warm, comforting smells of a family home. I had set the table with my good china, the set Thomas and I received for our wedding. It felt like a small act of defiance against the quiet creep of time, a celebration of our continuity. During dinner, the conversation was light, touching on their work, my book club's latest selection, the mundane details of life. But then, as I was serving a homemade apple pie, Mark steered the conversation onto its now familiar track. "Eleanor," he began, using my proper name. He never called me Mom, which always created a small, subtle distance. "Sarah and I were looking at some beautiful new condominium developments over on the west side. All one level, gorgeous granite countertops, a shared pool and gym. No yard work, no maintenance hassles. They even have a concierge. Doesn't that sound like a dream?" He smiled, a wide, salesman smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I felt my own smile tighten. "It sounds very lovely, Mark," I said carefully, placing a slice of pie on his plate. "But it also sounds like a very fancy hotel. This is my home." Sarah reached over and patted my hand. It felt condescending, not comforting. "We know, Mom, but we worry. You're here all alone. What if you fall on the stairs? What if something happens in the middle of the night? In one of those places, there's always someone around." "I have my emergency alert pendant," I reminded her, my voice a little sharper than I intended. "And Mrs. Gable next door has a key. I'm not alone." There was a moment of tense silence, the only sound the clink of forks on porcelain. "It's just this house," Sarah said, her voice taking on a new, harder edge. "It's an anchor, Mom. It's tying you down. And let's be practical. The value of this property is substantial, tied up and doing no one any good. Think of the financial freedom it could provide." Financial freedom. The words hung in the air between us. I looked from my daughter's earnest, frustrated face to her husband's calculating one. It was no longer about my safety, my comfort. The mask had slipped, just for a second, but it was long enough. It was about the money. It was about my house, my and Thomas's dream, being converted into a number in their bank account. "This house is not just an asset, Sarah," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "It's your father's legacy. It's my home. My life is here. That is not no good. That is everything." The rest of the dinner passed in a strained politeness. They left early, citing a busy morning. Sarah gave me a quick, perfunctory hug at the door. "Just think about it, okay, Mom? For me." I closed the door, my heart feeling heavy and sore. I cleaned the kitchen slowly, the ritual of washing the wedding china feeling suddenly sacred, a connection to a past where promises felt eternal. The house felt different now, the happy memories seeming to watch me with pity from the shadows. I went upstairs, changed for bed, and tried to read, but the words swam on the page. My mind was a whirlwind of their words, their looks, the undeniable pressure. It was past 11 when I finally gave up on sleep and decided to go downstairs for that glass of water, hoping the simple physical act would ground me. The wooden stairs creaked their familiar song under my weight. The kitchen was dark, lit only by the moonlight streaming through the window over the sink. And that's when I heard them. Their voices were low, but clear. carrying from the back patio where they must have returned, thinking I was long asleep. I moved closer to the back door, drawn by the sound like a moth to the flame, already knowing on some deep primal level that I was walking toward my own destruction. Can't be sentimental about this, Sarah. It's a simple business decision. The market is perfect right now. We get her into a managed facility, sell the house, and that capital can set us up for the next 20 years. We can finally buy the lake house. Managed facility. My blood ran cold. I know, Sarah replied, and I could hear the stress in her voice, but it wasn't stress about betraying her mother. It was the stress of executing a difficult plan. She's so stubborn. She loves this house more than anything. That's why we may have to be firm, Mark said, his voice chillingly pragmatic. If she won't go willingly, we may have to pursue other options. We can get a doctor to assess her, say she's a danger to herself living in this big old place. We can get power of attorney. Once we have that, the decision is ours, not hers. I stopped breathing. The world narrowed to the cold wood of the doorframe beneath my hand and the venomous clarity of their words. They weren't just suggesting I move, they were planning a coup. They were discussing how to legally strip me of my autonomy, my rights, my home. They were talking about having me declared incompetent, my own daughter. The child I had rocked to sleep, whose fevers I had stayed up all night to soothe, whose heartbreaks I had kissed away. She was standing in my moonlit garden, the garden her father had planted for her, and plotting my imprisonment. "She'll have to sell the house, Mark," she said, her voice now decisive, the stress replaced with resolve. "It's far too much for her to manage now, and that big garden is a liability. We'll find her a nice place for her, somewhere she can be with people her own age, where professionals can handle everything." I backed away from the door, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a sob that was equal parts grief and utter bottomless horror. The truth didn't just hit me, it swallowed me whole. This was no longer a disagreement. This was a betrayal so profound, so intimate, that it felt like a death. The mother I had been to her died in that moment, right there on the cool tiles of my kitchen floor. And as I stood there in the devastating quiet, the ashes of that old relationship gave birth to someone new, someone with nothing left to lose. The days that followed were a study in surreal, quiet agony. I moved through my routines like a ghost in my own home. Every room, every object was now viewed through the dual lens of memory and their chilling conversation. The garden was no longer my sanctuary, but a liability. The stairs were no longer a familiar path, but a potential pretext for a doctor's assessment. I saw my life through their eyes, and it was a horrifying sight. A cluttered, outdated, dangerous problem. The pressure began to mount almost immediately. It started with small, insidious things. Sarah began calling every day, her tone sickly sweet, laced with a concern that now felt like a weapon. "Hi, Mom, just checking in. You sound tired. Did you sleep okay? Were you confused about your medications today?" She was building a case, line by careful line. Then came the gifts. A week after that night, a package arrived, a large button telephone for easier dialing. The following day, a medical alert system more advanced than the one I had, with a note that read, "So we can have peace of mind." I accepted them all with a quiet, "Thank you, dear," my voice perfectly calm, while inside I was screaming. I began to feel like a prisoner under gentle, smiling surveillance. My every move felt watched, my every moment of normalcy potentially twisted into evidence of my decline. Mark started helping with my finances. He'd come over and say, "Eleanor, let me just take a quick look at your statements. You know, with all the scams targeting seniors, it's better to be safe." I would hand them over, my smile placid, while my mind raced. I knew what he was looking for, A missed payment, an odd withdrawal, anything to suggest I was no longer capable. I made sure there were none. My bookkeeping was impeccable, a silent testament to my enduring competence. The most painful pressure was the social isolation. They began to subtly drive a wedge between me and my support system. When my friend Clara called to plan our weekly lunch, Sarah happened to be over. "Oh, hi, Clara," she said, taking the phone, her voice full of faux worry. "Mom's actually been feeling a bit under the weather lately, a bit forgetful. Maybe we should keep things quiet for a while. I'll let you know when she's up for visitors." She hung up the phone, and I sat there, stunned. She was cutting me off from my friends, making me seem frail and confused to the very people who knew I was anything but. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare, all delivered with a smile and a hug. The walls were closing in, and the nice place they had planned for me felt less like a future and more like an inevitability they were meticulously engineering. I felt a profound, aching loneliness. The one person I should have been able to turn to was the architect of my despair. I would lie in bed at night, the silence of the house now feeling oppressive and threatening, and wonder how it had come to this. Was it something I had done? Had I loved her too much? Not enough? The questions were a torturous loop with no answer. The pressure was immense, a constant, heavy weight on my chest. But with every helpful phone call, every condescending gift, every severed connection to my old life, the quiet, diamond-hard resolve that had formed in me that night grew stronger and clearer. They were building their case, and so, silently, invisibly, I began to build my defense. The revelation, when it came, was not a dramatic, found-in-the-attic moment. It was quiet, practical, and born of the very independence they were trying to strip from me. It happened on a Tuesday. I was in my home office, a small, sunlit room that had been Thomas's study, paying bills online. Mark, in his new role as my unofficial financial overseer, had helpfully set up a new password manager on my computer to keep everything secure. A wave of suspicion, cold and clear, washed over me. What better way to monitor my activity than to have access to all my passwords? I didn't trust it. After he left, I decided to go old school. I would gather all my important physical documents, the deed to the house, the insurance papers, my will, and make a set of copies to keep at my lawyer's office, a man Thomas and I had used for decades, whom I trusted implicitly. I opened the mahogany box on my desk. Everything was there, neatly filed. I pulled out the folder labeled Estate. There was the deed, there were the insurance policies, and there was my will, the last one Thomas and I had made together. I read through its familiar, comforting language, the words that ensured everything would go to Sarah. It felt like a relic from another lifetime, a contract with a ghost. As I was about to close the folder, a smaller, clipped set of papers behind the will caught my eye. It was a document from my bank, one I didn't immediately recognize. I pulled it out. It was a statement for a safe deposit box. My name was on it. The box number was 214. The location was the main branch of my bank downtown. I stared at it, confused. I didn't have a safe deposit box. Thomas and I had closed ours years ago when we decided a good home safe was sufficient for our needs. I checked the date on the statement. It was from 3 months ago. A cold trickle of understanding started to seep into my mind. I picked up the phone and called the bank. I navigated the automated system, my heart beginning to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. Finally, a human voice came on the line. "Yes? Hello," I said, my voice remarkably steady. "This is Eleanor Vance. I'd like to confirm the access details for my safe deposit box, number 214.
There was a clicking of keys. Yes, Mrs. Vance, the box is in your name. The secondary access is granted to your daughter, Sarah Evans, and her husband, Mark Evans. Is there something I can help you with? The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I thanked the woman and hung up, my hand trembling. They had opened a safe deposit box in my name, without my knowledge, without my consent. They had taken me to the bank, probably under the guise of helping me with some other errand, and had, somehow, perhaps by exploiting the perception of my frailty, convinced a bank officer to add their names to it. What was in it? My mind raced, piecing together the horrifying puzzle. This was the other option Mark had mentioned. This was for the deed to the house. This was for the stock certificates. This was for any document they would need to control my assets once they had me declared incompetent. They weren't just planning for the future, they were actively preparing for it, setting the stage for a seamless, legal takeover the moment they could get a doctor to sign a piece of paper. The midpoint reveal was not just about discovering a piece of paper. It was the moment the abstract horror of their plan crystallized into a concrete, actionable fact. They had already begun. The war was not coming. It had already started, and I had been unaware that I was the battlefield. But now I knew, and knowing the specific, clinical nature of their treachery changed everything. The grief was suddenly overshadowed by something else, a cold, focused fury. It was no longer enough to just feel hurt. It was time to act.
A strange, profound calm settled over me in the days following my discovery. The emotional storm had passed, leaving in its wake a landscape of clear, hard certainty. I was no longer a victim, waiting for her fate. I was a general, preparing for a battle they didn't know we were fighting. My response would not be loud. It would not be emotional. It would be quiet, legal, and absolute. The first thing I did was call Arthur Pendleton, my lawyer. His father had been Thomas's lawyer, and Arthur had handled our affairs for the last 20 years. I didn't explain everything over the phone. I simply said, "Arthur, I need to see you. It's urgent, and it's about my estate. Discretion is paramount." His office was a quiet, wood-paneled space that smelled of old books and polished leather. Sitting across from him, I told him everything. I started with the pressure to sell the house, then the conversation I had overheard, and finally, the discovery of the safe deposit box. I spoke in a measured, factual tone, laying out the evidence of my betrayal like a prosecutor presenting a case. Arthur listened, his expression growing graver by the minute. When I finished, he removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. "Eleanor," he said, his voice heavy, "this is deeply concerning. What they have done with the safe deposit box is highly unethical and potentially illegal, depending on how it was obtained. But without proof of coercion, it's their word against yours." "I understand that, Arthur," I said, my hands folded neatly in my lap. "I'm not here to sue them. I'm here to make sure their plan fails, completely and utterly." He nodded. "What would you like to do?" "I want to change my will," I said, the words simple and final. "Everything. I want to create a new one. Tonight." We worked for hours. There was no anger in that room, only the quiet, meticulous work of restructuring a legacy. The new will was a masterpiece of legal precision and poetic justice. The house, the investments, the liquid assets, none of it would go to Sarah. Not a single penny. Instead, I bequeathed the house and a large endowment to the local historical society, with the stipulation that it be maintained as a living museum and community garden, preserving Thomas's and my dream in perpetuity. The rest of my estate was divided between my charity, which supported literacy programs for children, and a trust fund for any future children of my friends. A quiet rebuke to the idea that bloodline was the only thing that constituted family. Arthur also helped me draft a new power of attorney, naming him as my agent, and a robust living will, outlining my medical wishes in explicit detail, ensuring Sarah and Mark could never make those decisions for me. We documented everything. I wrote a long, detailed letter to be kept with the will, explaining my reasons. It was not a vindictive letter. It was a sad one, a chronicle of a love betrayed, a record of the conversation I had overheard and the safe deposit box I had discovered. It was my testimony. That night, back in my own home, I felt a peace I hadn't known in weeks. I wasn't hiding. I was simply waiting. The plan was in motion. The pieces were in place. The next move was theirs, but the end game was now mine.
The confrontation arrived a month later. They came on a Sunday afternoon, their faces set in masks of somber resolution. They didn't call ahead. They just showed up, and I knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was it, the final play. I invited them in, my heart a steady drumbeat beneath my calm exterior. I offered them tea. Sarah refused. "Mom, we need to talk," she said, her voice tight. "We're very worried about you." They sat across from me on the sofa, a united front. I remained in my armchair, Thomas's chair, a position of quiet authority. "Oh," I said, taking a sip of my own tea, "what seems to be the problem?" Mark took over, leaning forward, his hands clasped. "Eleanor, we've been patient, but your stubbornness about this house is becoming a real concern. We've spoken to a doctor, a specialist in geriatric mental health." He placed a brochure for a senior assessment center on the coffee table between us. "We think it's time for an evaluation, for your own good." The words hung in the air, exactly as I had heard them on the patio that night. They were doing it. They were actually doing it. I looked at my daughter. "Sarah, do you agree with this? Do you think I need to be evaluated?" She couldn't meet my eyes. "Mom, you're not yourself. You're paranoid. You hide your mail from us. You're isolating yourself. We need to make sure you can still take care of yourself." I placed my teacup down on its saucer. The gentle clink was the only sound in the room. "I see," I said softly. "And if this evaluation finds me lacking, what then?" "Then we would have to make decisions for you," Mark said, a hint of triumph in his voice. "We would become your legal guardians. We'd move you to a safe, managed facility and sell this house to pay for your care. It's really the only sensible path forward." The brutality of it, stated so plainly in my own living room, was breathtaking. "Sell my house," I repeated, letting the words sit there. I looked around the room, at the memories embedded in every corner, then back at them. "This house that your father and I built with our own hands, this house where we brought Sarah home, you would sell it to pay for a managed facility?" "It's just a house, Mom," Sarah burst out, her frustration finally boiling over. "It's just stuff. Why do you love these things more than you love me? More than you want to make my life easier?" There it was, the core of it. The entitlement, the staggering selfishness laid bare. I looked at her, my daughter, and I felt a final, quiet severing. "It was never about the things, Sarah," I said, my voice terribly calm. "It was about the love they represented, the history, the promise your father and I made to each other and to you. You weren't just selling a house. You were selling our story, and you were planning to evict me from it." I stood up and walked to my desk. I could feel their eyes on my back, confused. I opened the drawer and took out the manila envelope Arthur had given me. I walked back and placed it on the coffee table, right on top of the brochure for the assessment center. "What's that?" Mark asked, his confidence faltering for the first time. "This," I said, sitting back down, "is my new will and my new power of attorney.
executed and notarized last month. Sarah stared at the envelope as if it were a snake. Your new will? What are you talking about? I think it's self-explanatory, I said. In light of recent events, I felt a change was necessary. Mark snatched the envelope and tore it open. He scanned the first page, his face paling. He flipped to the next and the next, his eyes widening in disbelief. You can't do this, he stammered, his voice losing all its polished control. This is insane. You're leaving everything to a historical society and a charity? Sarah grabbed the papers from him. Her eyes darted across the pages, her hand flying to her mouth. When she looked up at me, her face was a mask of pure, undiluted horror. You're cutting me out, she whispered, the sound barely audible. You're cutting me out of your will? Your own daughter? No, Sarah, I said, my gaze steady on hers. You cut yourself out. You and Mark did that the night you stood in my garden and planned to have me declared incompetent so you could steal my home and lock me away. The blood drained from her face. You heard us. It wasn't a question. I heard you, I confirmed, my voice quiet as a prayer. I heard you call my garden a liability. I heard you talk about the nice place you'd find for me. I heard Mark suggest getting a doctor to assess me. And I later discovered the safe deposit box you opened in my name without my knowledge. I let the weight of that settle in the stunned silence. This, I said, gesturing to the documents in her shaking hands, is not an act of revenge. It is an act of preservation. I am preserving your father's legacy from the people who sought to destroy it. I am preserving my dignity from the people who sought to strip it from me. Mark was sputtering, his face flushed with rage. We'll contest this. We'll prove you weren't of sound mind. This is the act of a vindictive, crazy old woman. I allowed myself a small, cold smile. You're welcome to try, Mark. My lawyer, Arthur Pendleton, has a signed letter from me, written the night I executed this will, detailing exactly what I overheard and my discovery of the safe deposit box. He also has affidavits from my doctor and my friends, all attesting to my mental soundness. You will spend a fortune in legal fees, and you will lose. You will be exposed for what you are, and you will get nothing. The finality in my voice silenced him. He slumped back into the sofa, defeated. Sarah was crying now, deep, wrenching sobs. Mom, I'm sorry. We were wrong. We were just scared for you. No, I said, my voice softening for the first time, but not with forgiveness, with pity. You weren't scared for me. You were scared for your inheritance. You were impatient for your future, and in your greed, you destroyed it. I stood up, a clear signal that the conversation was over. I want you to leave my house now. This is still my home, and you're no longer welcome in it. They left without another word. Sarah was sobbing, supported by a shell-shocked Mark. I watched them walk down the path my husband had laid, get into their expensive car, and drive away from the life they had tried to steal. I closed the door. The house was silent once more. But this time, the silence was not lonely. It was peaceful. It was mine.
The aftermath was not about celebration. It was about reclamation. The first thing I did was go to the bank with Arthur and reclaim sole control of my safe deposit box, closing it for good. The weight of that small key being returned to me felt more significant than any document. It was the key to my own life, and I had taken it back. I never heard from Mark again. Sarah tried, at first. There were tearful phone calls, pleading letters, attempts to explain and justify. I listened, but I did not engage. The bridge between us had been burned, not in a fiery rage, but with the slow, cold application of truth. There was no path back to what we were. The trust was gone, and without it, a relationship cannot stand. I eventually had to change my phone number. It was a sad, necessary act of self-preservation. My life now is quieter, but it is authentic. My friends, when I explained what had happened, rallied around me with a ferocity that brought tears to my eyes. Clara, from my book club, now comes over twice a week, and we work in the garden together. The Historical Society has already been in touch, thrilled with the bequest, and I enjoy giving them tours, telling them stories about Thomas and the history embedded in these walls. I am not just preserving a house for them. I am curating a story of love and labor, a story that will now outlive me in the way it was always meant to. The moral of the story is not that family is unimportant. It is that love must be a gift, not an entitlement. That respect is a currency earned through actions, not demanded through blood relation. I learned that the hardest battles are not fought with shouts, but with quiet resolve. That protecting your pace is not selfish, it is sacred. I look at my garden now, the roses blooming, the lavender scenting the air, and I feel Thomas's presence. I did not let them destroy what we built. I protected our dream. The greatest revenge is not a legal document or a financial victory. It is a life lived well, on your own terms, surrounded by the love you choose to let in. It is waking up in the home you love, in the life you built, free. And in that, I have found my ultimate victory.
If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt the sting of betrayal, or the quiet strength that comes from choosing yourself, then you understand why channels like this one exist. Our stories matter. Sharing them reminds us that we are not alone in our struggles, that dignity can be found even in the most painful circumstances. This is just one real-life story, one emotional journey through a family drama that so many can, unfortunately, relate to. If you'd like to hear more stories like mine, stories of truth, forgiveness, and finding the strength to set boundaries, then please consider subscribing to the channel. It would mean the world to me and to the others who share their lives here to have you as part of our community. Every like, every comment where you share your own thoughts or experiences helps these stories reach others who might need to hear them. It creates a ripple of understanding and empathy. Thank you for listening to my story today. Thank you for sitting with me in my quiet kitchen and in my moonlit garden. It's a heavy story to carry, and your attention has helped lighten the load. Take care of yourselves, and remember to cherish the people who cherish you, and protect the peace you've worked so hard to build. I'll see you in the next story.